think a lot about my parents when I talk about education. And the interesting thing about my mom and dad is that they actually did not have much of a formal education. My dad went to grade 2 and he had to go off and fight in the Greek Civil War. And my mom had a grade 6 education. But to understand that they didn't have much of an education, but they are absolutely incredible learners. And there are so many things that I learned from them as a child that I still implement to this day, that still have a huge impact on what I do in education. And I think for me, one of the biggest things is really, how do we make those around us better? How do we actually elevate those that we connect with? I watched my parents for years own a restaurant, connect with people, and they always left feeling better when, after that interaction. And I think that's a really important aspect of what we do in education. Like when the kids enter our classrooms, do they leave better than when they started? And it's the same thing with our staff. Having this conversation with Superintendent John Cabral from Taunton Schools, he really exemplifies this idea, not only in his focus on what he does, but where he learned it from his parents who have a very similar immigrant story to my parents. And I think those stories are really important, and it honors, my family's history, his family's history. But he reminded me about the importance of elevating those that we connect with and how he learned that from his parents. And he has so many great stories about some of the things that didn't work this school year, some of the things that, he could have been better at, not only in an educational sense, but in a personal sense, which are very closely linked. But he shares some of the things that he hopes as he goes forward. And it was a great conversation. I hope you enjoy it. Welcome back to another episode of the Innovator's Mindset podcast. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Innovator's Mindset podcast. I am very blessed today to have Superintendent John Cabral joining me today on the podcast. And I really wanted to kind of hear, we're at the end of the 2020-21 school year. That's a lot of 20s. And I just kind of wanted to hear, just some of the positives, some of the struggles that you had at a school system. And I've known John for this past year or so. We've had great connections. I've connected with many of his staff who are absolutely wonderful. Many of them actually have emailed me, reached out to me. I've connected with some of your board as well, which has been really cool. And one of the things that I can tell you about John that I think is really powerful is, and why I wanted to have him on the podcast, is he's really focused on relationships and really connecting with people, serving them. Now, I know he's a superintendent, so I'm sure not every teacher in your school district, because, I always say this and people don't like it. No matter how good you are at your job, somebody hates you. So that is one of the, but from my interactions, from what I've seen, I've been really amazed by you and what you're doing, and really his focus on elevating people and really kind of sharing how do we connect. And when our kids come to our classrooms, when our teachers are in our systems, when we work with our staff, how do they actually leave better than when they started? And that's one thing I really appreciate about you, John. And it's why I wanted to have you on the podcast. So John, if you could just kind of introduce yourself, tell a little bit about your journey in education and how you got to where you're at now.
Thank you, George. I'm going to go way back, George. I'm going to go way back. So
Good.
My family immigrated to the United States in 1975 from the Azores Islands, which is located in the Atlantic Ocean. So I've been a product of the public education throughout my entire life. So when I entered public education, even though I was fluent in English, I was placed in an English language learner program. So I wasn't a bilingual program when I first came to when I first started school in this country. Because I was speaking English, and I'm only thinking back, then I was placed in partial special education, back into bilingual, back into special education. So I was always kind of bouncing around back and forth up until about third grade, when I always joke and said when they finally left me alone. When they finally left me alone and let me just stay in class, be mainstream, be around my peers, and be around educators. That's when I really started to kind of hit my stride in education as a learner. So elementary school was outside of being bounced around between a couple different programs. was a good experience. Middle school, high school, I went to a very large high school. At the time, I believe it was 3,300 kids in the high school. And during that time in high school, I knew I wanted to go to college. The problem back then was both my parents did not speak English. Both my parents were mill workers, unskilled labor, so we weren't making a lot of money at the time. So I vividly remember my senior year in high school. It was probably sometime in the fall. My father, very, very proud, told me that he had a job lined up for me at Quaker Fabric. And I remember looking at my dad and saying, Dad, that's great, and I appreciate that, but I want to go to college. And I remember my father being a little deflated because he was a very proud mill worker, provided for his family, bought us a home, put food on the table. George, I mean, your parents went through a similar story. So he was kind of deflated that I didn't want to kind of get into family business, so to speak. But he also understood, I think he started to understand the importance of education. And I think he knew the importance of education, but I think he was scared to death of how to pay for it. Especially knowing that at the time, I mean, they were just barely scraping enough to pay for the house, put clothes on our back and give us the minimum that we needed. So I was lucky in the sense that I had some great mentors in education who helped me navigate the college process. And college was by chance. College was really by chance. It was something I wanted to do. I didn't know where I was going. So I was at a New Year's Eve party with one of my former teammates. It was at one of the Portuguese clubs. I'm sure you must have like those Greek clubs where you get together. Yeah. So it was New Year's Eve. We're at the club, celebrating New Year's, and I was talking to my friend Rick's brother Louis. Louis, very similar story to ours. Louis came over when he was 18, spent 1 year in Fall River, then he ended up in Rockford, Illinois, playing soccer in Rockford. So Louis and I start chatting, and he's like, would you consider coming out to Benedictine University and playing soccer? And I was, first question, how much? How much does it cost? And when he told me it was about 15 to 20,000 a year, I'm like, my parents can't afford that. I think my parents could barely afford community college at that time. So when I spoke with Louis and he was explaining, what about financial aid? What do your parents do for work? And when I explained what my parents did for work and their income levels, he's like, you should easily qualify for enough financial aid, and between financial aid and scholarships, you should be able to attend Benedictine University. And let me tell you, what an experience to this day. Benedictine University is located about 40 minutes south of Chicago, outside of Cicero, Illinois. And talk about a melting pot. That was the first time I had lamb, George. A lot of my teammates were Greek.
I was going to say it must have been around Greeks.
A lot. Well, and this is what I loved about the college experience, and especially being a soccer player. Everybody on the team came from a different country, or everybody had roots in another country, or family came over from another country. So we were a very, very tight knit group. We would eat breakfast together, lunch together, dinner together, study together. We were a very tight group, but we could also relate to each other. Now, we knew what our families were doing to scrap and struggle to put us through college. So we weren't going to mess around with that opportunity. And we also knew that this was an opportunity. I mean, blessed to play soccer for 4 years, but knowing that I was going to get a quality education from a very well-known school that was going to also put me on the path to be able to provide for myself, to be able to provide for my family, and now be able to give my children the opportunities that I was not able to have, and then some. So I can't complain. I've been blessed throughout elementary, middle school, high school, and university to be surrounded by some amazing adults who always put others first. And one of the things that I'm always reminded of, or I like to remind myself, is being a servant leader. And I think about Jimmy Conrad, who was the senior captain at Benedictine University. Jim was a tremendous soccer player, 6'3". I mean, he had a full ride to Bowling Green, started on a team that made the national tournament. For whatever reasons, Jim, like, you know what? I'm not cut out for this. I want to go to a smaller school and focus on my studies. What a leader. What a leader. Because you think back to maybe your high school playing days, or you think back to maybe if you were able to play in college. A lot of times the upperclassmen weren't so nice to the underclassmen. and Jim figured out, or Jim always had a message that really permeated throughout the entire team. And as I rose through the ranks, that was something that I was always mindful of. Jim always said that we are only as strong as our weakest players.
Mm-hmm.
And Jim always reminded that our weakest players could be seniors, our weakest players could be freshmen. So he treated everyone on the team as if we were all equals. We were not freshmen, we were not seniors, we were the Benedictine University soccer team. And I really think about Jim's leadership, because here's a kid who's an All-American in high school, scholarship to Bowling Green, to be that humble and to be that modest, and to really lead, And I had classes with Jim. He had your back no matter what. And he always put the needs of others first. So again, as a teacher and as a leader, and I'm sitting behind my wall, Simon Sinek, start with your why, or start with why. And really, I think back about what is our why, and this is why I think when I first heard you speak, we resonated.
Mm-hmm.
Was I got a clear sense of your why and your background, and it really clicked with me. I felt like I understood where you came from. I understood where your parents came from, and I understand why your family and why you value education as much as you do. So as much as the X's and O's are important, don't get me wrong. X's and O's are very important. ABCs are very important. But those relationship pieces, that's going to help you through your schooling. It's going to help you post-secondary, and it's going to help you in the workplace. So take advantage of all those lessons.
Yeah, and the thing, John, the thing that when I'm listening to your story, and I think the whole the immigrant experience, right, and our parents coming here, us growing up, and I'm really proud of my Greek heritage. I'm really proud of growing up that way, and it's because of what my parents instilled in me. And I look at like what my mom and dad did for me and sacrifice for myself, my siblings, to be able to do what I'm doing today. And they instilled in me this idea that your job is to ensure that things are better for your own kids, right?
Right.
Like whatever we gave you, and that's what they did for me, right? Like I had so much of an easier time than my parents did, because my parents made sure of that, right? And it wasn't we were like rich and had all this disposable income or things like that, but I think they instilled in me a lot of things that I take into being an administrator, being an educator, the importance of relationships. Like I always compare how they ran their restaurant to how I ran my school and what I learned from that experience. And so I think the pride that you have when you talk about your family is something that resonates with me, because it shows that you don't need formal education to be a very intelligent person. You don't need there's a lot of things that we can learn from people that maybe didn't have the same path in education, because let's be honest, they didn't have the opportunity that we did. And the reason we had that opportunity is because of our families, because of our parents. And so I'm curious about this. Like, what do you see in your work today that you think is influenced by your parents and their immigrant story? Like, what are some things that you look at that you do that you're like, yeah, this is what my parents instilled in me? Like, what are some of those things?
Yeah, it's funny that you say that, because I had a conversation with my mom the other day.
Mm-hmm.
Man, I taught my mom how to FaceTime, George.
Awesome.
I mean, that's a podcast in itself. But what I found was that my conversations with my mom are longer when I FaceTime with her than when
Yeah.
I call her on the phone.
Yeah.
But I was thinking to myself, is my mom only had a 6th grade education back in the years of ours. My father was a 4th grade education because he had to go work to support the family. And my mom's situation was different because she was a woman. And I kept thinking to myself, is if my mom had the opportunity to be educated the way I was, she would have been a great leader.
Mm-hmm.
She's no nonsense. She tells it like it is. She's honest. She's sincere. She'll give you the shirt off her back.
Mm-hmm.
And she works very, very hard. And I'd like to think that I have some of those attributes
Mm-hmm.
of my mother, and I believe I exhibit those, or at least I want to exhibit those every day that I come to work. And she was a mill worker for 30 plus years. Really, I cannot remember my parents, probably like you, taking a sick day.
Right.
Right. With my father, he was a very soft spoken leader. He led more by example.
Hmm.
When he did speak, people listened, and it took a lot. And I think I have my father's patience and my mother's impatience. My father was a very
Right.
patient man, and it took a lot. It took a lot to upset him. And if you upset my father, then 9 out of 10 times you were probably in the wrong,
Right.
so,
Right.
so to speak. So I'd like to think that I'm a patient. Uh,
Hmm.
you know, my parents are both good listeners. And I think part of doing the work that we do, George, you got to be a good listener. It's one thing to be hearing to be listening, but are you hearing people
Right.
when they're talking? So, and again, I think it's mostly that work ethic, and also just the fact that I think I get my father's innovation, being innovative mind. He worked in the mill, and he was always being recognized for being efficient and for coming up with little, always tinkering and making things and creating things to make the workflow more efficient as a machine operator. And my mother is just, she's just a hard, honest
Hmm.
worker. And the other piece that I think I get from both my parents, and my mother was reminding me of this the other day, when times were tough in the mill where she worked. My mother was a seamstress, and she would, if her hours were cut, can I clean bathrooms? Can I sweep floors? What
Hmm.
can I do to make sure that I'm getting my full pay every week? Because any job is not above me, and I would never ask someone to do something I wouldn't do myself. And I've always felt that as a leader, that if I'm asking you to do something, it's because I would do it myself.
Well, that to me, like when you talk about that, that's something that really instilled in me is that my parents taught me that you find opportunity, you don't wait for opportunity to find you because it's not because other people are looking for it, and really taking advantage of those opportunities, taking advantage. And I would actually say, your mom was a great leader because the whole purpose of leadership is to develop great leaders, and that's what you are today, right? And I think those qualities are obviously, and I'm great that they're your mom's influenced you with that. There's one thing that you said, and I want to share like a really quick story because I think it's a really important one about your dad, uh, not saying much, but when he did, people listened. Because I always share this story, and I think it's really powerful. I'm really into basketball. I don't know if you know this about me, but I refed very high level basketball for several years, and then I basically really got into speaking and things like that. And I had to choose, like, am I going to continue on the path? And I was actually doing like college basketball, things like that. And I said, you know what? I'd rather speak because more people are cheering me in those spaces, right? I'm getting booed like 100% of the time by 50% of the people. And we would always do these conversations with the referees, um, like before the game, like, hey, let's talk about the teams. What do we know about them? What do we know about the coaches? And the coaches, we always had to know about the coaches because some of them have big tempers, whatever. And there's this one game, and basically it was like the exact opposite. There is this guy who coached, and he just non-stop yelled at you, just all of the time. Was incredibly annoying. And you know what you did as a referee? You just didn't listen to him because like he's complaining about everything, so you just don't trust his opinion. And I actually think it's a really important thing is that when a lot of people, all I hear them is complaining about stuff. I just tune them out. I am like, yeah, I really don't care what you have to say because everything is awful. And then I remember this one time. I'm not saying things aren't bad, right? But
Right.
here's the adverse. In the same game, we had this coach, and I remember saying, and I remember the referee that I was doing the game with, who was much more senior than me. And I'm not meaning older. I mean had much more experienced. He said, "This guy doesn't say much. If he says something to you, though, you probably did something wrong. Just be aware. Just be aware of that. He won't say anything to you unless, and like, I, to be honest, yeah, like, I probably refed him 10 times and maybe heard two things. And when those two things, I listened. And I am very cognizant of that is that, hey, like, I don't need to be speaking all the time, but when I do speak, does it matter what I have to say? Right. And what am I pointing out? And I think this is like, there's a lot of that we can learn, from our families. I think it's just something I wanted to share because I think it's probably pertinent to a lot of maybe what some people are going through, because we spend a lot of attention on people that just are nonstop on the sideline. And then we don't pay attention to the person that actually, maybe, once in a while speaks up, and, they have good intentions. They know they're well versed in their stuff, and, they're just trying to do the right thing, not necessarily just be in your face all the time. So I just want to share that because, when you shared about your dad, that's something that really stuck in my mind. One of the reasons I want to have you on, John, as a superintendent, I just kind of want to hear about your year. I want to hear about the year in your school. What was maybe we'll start with this. What was one of the hardest things that you had to go through this year?
I think one of the hardest things I had to go through this year, personally or educationally, or both.
Well, hey, you know what? Whatever. Because I think I love talking about the personal side, because if we don't think the personal side has an impact on what we do as educators, we're probably crazy.
The work is real, George.
Yeah.
The work is real. I would say that probably the most difficult piece, or the most difficult time, was when I felt I wasn't spending enough quality time. Because I got two kids in the school system too. The two kids in the school system I work in. So where I felt probably at my lowest during the pandemic, to be real and vulnerable, was when I felt I wasn't given the time, or wasn't putting in the time at home to support my wife and both my daughters. That was probably the time where I felt the lowest. But I also knew that I had 8,000 kids in the Taunton Public Schools, 1,300 employees, and my leadership team, I'm one of 6, and the leadership team plus 12 principals. And we had a lot of work to do in a medium-sized urban school system. So knowing that we were spending countless hours in the office on a daily basis, making some very, very tough decisions, putting in the work, and then having to go home on the phone, on Zooms, putting in the work on the weekends. I remember on Sundays, Sundays last spring around this time, my wife and my daughters, they're outside with the neighbors, just enjoying the weather, enjoying time. And we're trying to figure out, how we're going to get packets home to kids, how we're going to feed kids. We're impact bargaining with our 6 unions to make sure that we provide them with a safe working environment, that they have the resources to work. There was a lot of personal sacrifice. And I knew that if I was feeling this way, I knew my leadership team was feeling just as bad, because I was putting a lot of heavy demands on them.
Right.
I knew the principals were feeling the stress. And I also know the stress was on our teachers, and was also trickling down to the parents. So that was probably the hardest and probably the lowest time. And I guess if you're going to ask during the pandemic, school related, I just really wish we could have done more. I would just leave it at that. I just wish we could have done more. I wish we could have had a more robust remote and hybrid platform, which I think, considering what we did and the resources that we put in the hands of our classrooms, and I thought we did a very good job. I thought we were you'd be proud, Judd. We were pretty innovative as far as the work that we did. And then following the data, as far as being able to stay open and not close, looking at the data. So we did a phased in hybrid, where we started remote. And the reason we started remote was to give all our kids, we were not a one-to-one district. One-to-one district meaning not every student in the Taunton Public Schools had a device, had a Chromebook or a laptop, right? And all our teachers did not have devices. So we had a very robust small group instruction model at the elementary and middle school. Our high school kids were more equipped to go remote. In some of our middle schools were equipped to go remote. At the elementary and pre-K level, we were not ready to go remote. So we went with a phased-in hybrid plan, where we went the first 6 weeks purely remote, with teachers teaching from the classroom. And part of that strategy was to get them equipped and get them well-versed in using the technology, using the different platforms, using the different apps that we had purchased and put together for them. So that was what the first 6 weeks were for. And then we transitioned to hybrid once everyone had that foundation. So we set the foundation, slow to go fast. So once everyone had the foundation and how the remote piece works, the in-person piece is what teachers do natural. So by having giving them that time to grow and learn as professionals, because you said it, we were all first year teachers again.
Yep.
We were taking paper and pencil documents, digitizing them or converting them into digital documents, and then teaching them off a 13-inch screen. So so when we and then we transitioned to our in-person plan, 5 days a week. And we've been in person since, I believe we've been in person since April 5th. So we were able to get the last 2.5 months of in person, but it's been a challenge. I mean, like I just said, 13-inch monitor trying to teach a class of 30.
Right.
So we invested in technology. We purchased 3-in-1 poly cameras, which track the teacher, so the teacher could have more of that natural feeling of teaching from the front of the classroom while the camera tracked them with the speaker, so the kids could hear at home, and then with the speaker, so the teacher could hear what the kids are saying at home nice and clear. We purchased Prometheum boards for all our elementary and all our middle school classrooms, so the teachers could see the students that are at home and see the kids that are in person, and use all the apps on a 55-inch monitor versus a 13-inch Chromebook. And then for our high school teachers who had kids in person and remote, we gave them all the tools except the Prometheum boards, because as they were more equipped to use the technology. But we provided them with 42-inch monitors so that they could see the kids at home and see the kids in person simultaneously versus always being focused on their Chromebook. So and we tried to be innovative, George. I think you'd be proud of us.
I
but
am.
again,
I am. I've talked to their staff. They're doing incredible things.
I wish we could have done more. We fed all our kids. We fed all our kids. I mean, I think to date, between the pandemic and in person, we've served over 600,000 meals.
So
I know.
It's interesting to listen to you, and I don't know. It's kind of interesting to listen to your two answers, and I think this is like I had a little light bulb moment as I'm listening to you, because you first of all talked about how much you did, how it pulled you away from home, right? And I actually talk about like basically March 2020. I went from being on the road all the time to always being home, but it took me a few months to be present, right? Like I was home, but being present is different, and I'm still working on that, still trying to get better. But then also we have this inclination to say like, but we should have done more for their students, right? And it's like, hey, like I'm having this issue where I want to be, be more present, but then I'm also struggling with this notion that I feel I just never can do enough. And I think that for me, what I really learned, and I hope, and I know like this is a constant struggle. You cannot help people if you are in a bad place personally. You can't, like you might be able for a bit, but it always catches up to you. And when it catches up, it's like I remember just giving everything to my staff, always being there, and then leads to like a mental breakdown. Have to take like a month off of work because I just can't handle it anymore. And so we're in education, we're so willing to give everything to others, yet we end up being depleted, and it leads to a bad space sometimes. And it's like interesting because you're like I can hear the struggle, right? Like you're like, hey, I should have been more present, I should have done this, but I also should have done more, I should have done this. It's like, well, you can't do both all at the same time, right? And it's kind of like where do we take that? So it's kind of interesting to hear that. And so I think, pointing out, because I wish I could just say like, hey, do this for X amount of time, do this for X amount of time, you all be good. It's a constant struggle in education. But I think one of the things that I noticed about what you've done in your district, and just having the opportunity to work with them, you're really trying to honor the incredible work that your teachers have done. You're trying to honor them with time, honor them, with those good moments, because I know that you're doing this. But I'm going to give you this advice. John.
All right, George.
You have to take care of yourself, my friend. You know this, because at the end of the day, you won't be able to take care of that staff or those kids, right? And that's the thing. And like anyone else who's listening, this is probably you too right now. So it's just something to think about, right? And I know there's never a time in education where you're just done. You're like, oh, I finished everything, and you always have something to do. So like, just understand that, and whatever. Just back, and I'm maybe giving this pep talk to myself a little bit because I get caught in this too, right? John, we've had lots of conversations. You've done your staff has done a great job, and I know that. I know you don't take credit for that at all, but like if your staff's doing a great job, you've done a wonderful job, obviously supporting them. As you go into the next school year, and this is going to be the last question I ask you about this stuff, but when you go into the next school year, what do you see that you'll be better at because of the 2021 school year?
Wow, I mean, we're so focused on accelerated learning and student learning loss in our summer programs. What do I think we'll be better at?
Yeah.
I think what we all learned. I think what we all learned is that change can happen.
Mm-hmm.
In education, change has always been slow.
Mm-hmm.
And we learned in the pandemic that, I mean, one of my superintendent colleagues said that we were building a plane at 35,000 feet while flying it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so I think one of the things that we'll learn, and one of the things that I'll remind people, is that when they say something can't be done, it can be done.
Mm-hmm.
But I think one of the things we learned is that one of the things that I learned is our kids. Our kids have one of the things that I learned throughout this whole time is the voice of our students, to value even more so than before, the voice of our students. And I also think what we learned, and I think about one of my teachers who had to deliver packets and materials to one of her students who didn't have the best home life, the best home condition.
Mm-hmm.
Is that I think what she took away was she didn't realize the different needs of the
Mm-hmm.
kids in our
Right.
classroom. So I think what we'll learn and do a better job of is not assuming that our kids all come from like environments,
Mm-hmm.
not assuming that our kids all had the same upbringing that we had, not assuming that all our kids have a mom and dad who can read to them at home or help them with their homework. I mean, I think we're going to learn to be even more student-centered than we were before. I also think that we're going to be much more better when it comes to innovation. As far as being a one-to-one district, our kids are light years ahead of us
Right.
when it comes to utilizing this technology. And I am so proud of the work our teachers put in to get acclimated and to learn this new technology. I mean, I have a teacher who's been in this work for over 50 years, and he embraced it and he figured it out and he made it work.
Mm-hmm.
So if a veteran teacher or a seasoned teacher with 50 years of experience can figure out how to make this work and educate and connect and reach with your kids, then there's no reason why we can't do that on a more regular basis or as needed. So I think we're going to be better at connecting and relating to our kids. I'm very excited about what the future of education looks like
Mm-hmm.
at the high school level, for dual enrollment, for early college experiences. I think a lot of our kids will be able to attend university or attend colleges asynchronously, or I mean, wouldn't it be wild, George, someday if think about senior year, George Couros in Canada, right? Takes, instead of going to his A block or his first period class in a brick and mortar classroom,
Yeah.
he attends that class at home asynchronously, right? He does his coursework and then goes to class for brick and mortar
Mm-hmm.
and then has his lunch. And then
Yeah.
maybe the last 2 blocks of the day, that student goes out to an internship and gets that real hands-on experience. So I think what we're going to see, maybe not next year, maybe not the year after, but I think it's going to come, is we're going to see this shift where it's going to be more personalized learning, which really excites me. And I think gets to being, again, student-centered.
When you talked about this, one of the things that you said addressing some of the learning loss, right? And what's interesting is that when you said that, then you talked about all the stuff that your students learned and taught you. Then you talked about all the stuff that your teachers have done to do incredible things. And I think that to kind of put some perspective, when I hear the term learning loss, there's things that, maybe kids weren't able to do A, B, and C within the school curriculum, right? Because we didn't focus on that. We didn't have as much time in curriculum. But then why are we not focusing on all the other outside things, the curriculum that, students did, our staff did? And I think that we've seen that there's been incredible gains this year, but just maybe not necessarily with school curriculum, but kids have learned to adapt. Teachers have learned to shift and do some really incredible things. I've watched leaders saying like, hey, my teachers actually are willing to embrace change. Maybe I haven't been delivering it the best before, and maybe I need to address what I'm doing. So I think there's been so much gained, from this too. And I'm not just trying to say that to, make people feel comfortable, but you just gave great examples of like, hey, this teacher did this teacher did this. We learned this from our students. So I think part of it too is kind of reframing and thinking about like, what did we gain actually? What did we become better at, and how do we utilize that moving forward? And your staff has done an incredible job. Last thing I'm going to ask you, when we first met, I'm a big Raptors fan, and you can see my We the North hat. And your Celtics just knocked my Raptors out. Now, my Raptors didn't even make the playoffs this year, right? So, because we're tanking on purpose because we want to get a good lottery pick. But the Celtics just got knocked out of the playoffs, and then they got rid of their GM, right? Danny Ainge, or at least president. I don't know if he's president or whatever. They got rid of their coach, who moved up, right? So this is going to be on wax by the time I'm going to ask you your guess. Who's going to be the next head coach of the Boston Celtics? And by the time this is up, we'll know if your answer is right or not, because this is being pre-recorded. So
I was just talking about this last night, and I just want to disappoint you, George. You're not going to get Cade Cunningham. He's not going to the Toronto Raptors.
Whatever.
Okay?
Whatever.
But I believe if I was playing GM for the day for the Boston Celtics, my next head coach would be Chauncey Billups.
Chauncey Billups. So do you know? Okay, Chauncey Billups would be great. Does he coach anywhere right now?
I know. Last time, I think Chauncey is still doing some TV work. I don't know if he's coaching, but what I like about Chauncey was, if you remember his career.
Oh, I do. I'm a Lakers fan too, so I'm not I don't like Chauncey Billups because they beat the Pistons. They lost to the Pistons. Lakers. He was incredible.
Well, he was drafted by the Celtics by Rick Pitino. He was a top 5 pick. He struggled early on. I think he took a little while to adjust to the NBA game. Got traded early on in his career. I think he got traded to Denver.
Okay.
And then again, I think it took him about 3 to 5 years to finally find his groove. And then when he went, so again, he's had his struggle in the NBA, which that to me that's how you build and develop players, because good coaches know the work that it takes to be successful in the league. And I think Chauncey has that pedigree. And then Chauncey also played with those great Piston teams that knocked out those Lakers, right? With Rip Hamilton, and they had that Ben Wallace, I believe.
Ben Wallace, Rasheed Wallace is on that team too.
And again, that exemplified a team. Yeah. They did not have that one superstar. They were pretty much well balanced. So I would say Chauncey.
They actually went to the finals again. They lost to, I think, San Antonio later, and they never had a superstar. It was like, it's totally different from. But so there's 2 things I want to share with you. First of all, the rumor right now is Mike Krzyzewski from Duke. That's the rumor that's going on. I don't think that's going to happen, but we'll know by the time this is if it was wrong. But yesterday, and I don't know if you know this guy. This has nothing. It's not to do with the coach. Yesterday on Twitter, Masai Ujiri was actually trending. So I don't know if you know who Masai Ujiri is, but he is the brains behind the Toronto Raptors, and he's a free agent. And he was trending because the Celtics want him so bad. And if Masai Ujiri goes to the Celtics and leaves the Raptors, I will never talk to you again. I will be he is the greatest. He is like, basically, he is the most important Raptor of all time. That's what I believe.
He's a coach or GM?
He's I don't know if he's the GM or the president of basketball operations, but he is like basically runs everything. He is the most brilliant mind, and if the Celtics steal him from the Raptors, I will never talk to you again. I will be so upset about it. That's it.
I'll send you a Celtics jersey with Cabral on it.
All right. Hey, John, it was awesome to have you on the podcast. And for anyone who wants to follow John, a link down to where he is on social media. You're on Twitter, right, John? I know you're there.
I'm on Twitter through the Taunton Public Schools.
So that's perfect. So thanks for all you do. Shout out to your amazing staff, because I have loved working with them. Gotta give them a special shout out. So I don't know. I wonder if any of them are going to watch this, but I know how proud you are of them, and that I can feel that every time I talk to you, because I know that you're proud of how great a job your staff has done this year. So thanks everyone for listening. John, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
And George, I just want to say thank you for your work and support of Taunton Public Schools. I mean, your messages to start the year and mid-year, were instrumental and helped us do this work. So thank you, George.
Blessed to be with y'all. Have a wonderful day, everyone.